a bunch of pre-cons were just announced, and Rob Sewell will be doing a whole bunch of DevOpsy stuff. We created a short link at sequelps.io/precon, and you can sign up for his precon if you're interested. It's primarily PowerShell. He's also covering VSTS, CI, CD, and things like that.
Alrighty, sounds good. So, Jens, I'm going to turn this over to you. Yeah, I got lots of, let's see here. I'm going to find Jens in this. There we go. And I'm going to make you the presenter.
Okay, good.
It's all you.
Good. So I'll kick off my slideshow and let me know when you can see it. So now I'm not hearing.
I can see it. You should be good.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. So this session is on delivering BI continuously. My name is Jens. I work out of Copenhagen, Denmark, and I've been working with BI for the past 15 years or so. You can reach me by email, Twitter, or source like that, and LinkedIn if you want, if you have questions afterwards. I believe my slide deck will be on the DevOps page. So you can always go look there if not.
We'll have it on YouTube as well, so it'll be available.
Okay. Good. So one important notice for this session, the demos will be for tabular models only. So the intent is that you can actually develop the whole DevOps process for SQL database, SSIS packages, reporting services, reports, and obviously analysis services models. But that's just too big a mouthful for a session like this. So I'm focusing on demonstrating the tabular model because that has some quirky edges around the corners in the Visual Studio Online tool. So that's why I'm focusing on that. Briefly, the agenda. First off, we'll look at the tools that you'll need in order to get going with this, what kind of extensions and updates, and we'll go into Visual Studio Online as well. Once in there, we'll do a build of a tabular model in analysis services, and then after that, we will create a release process. When we are at the wrap-up, we will have witnessed a complete check-in through Visual Studio, automatically built and automatically released to a server in Azure Analysis Services. Questions can come as we go. Otherwise, we'll have a wrap-up at the end. So first off, Visual Studio used to be a programmer's IDE only, but now we can do database projects, SSIS, reporting services, and analysis services projects from that tool. Currently, we do not still have SSIS for the latest edition. I haven't heard anything about when that will come out, but reporting services, analysis services, and database projects are all supported in 2017 edition. In order to get your SQL Server data tools in Visual Studio, you have to click off the Visual Studio installer and select SQL Server data tools in the data storage and processing options. You can opt in to get other items in there as well. So for the relational part, that's some of the Redgate tools that are coming along with the installer since recently, I think, as well as some other features for Azure Data Lake and Stream Analytics and so on. Once you get Visual Studio and SQL Server data tools installed, you'll have to install some extensions in order to be able to do reporting services projects and analysis services projects. And that you do by simply searching for extensions within the tool and installing them from there. As I said earlier, integration services is not supported in 2017 yet, but it's still good in 2015, and you can make use of 2015 for the process that I'm showing afterwards, still as good. It connects to Visual Studio Online just as 2017 does, so there should be no issues there. Now, Visual Studio Online has come a long way. When I started, it was Visual Source Safe, which was actually only a code repository with some advanced versioning on top of it. And that evolved into Team Foundation Server, which was still an on-prem version of your code repository, which then in the end evolved into Visual Studio Team Services that we see today. So now it's Team Foundation Version Control, or Git if you like that flavor. Visual Studio Online actually supports both. Also, there are a lot of agile tools within the portal and also integrated into SQL Server data tools. According to Gartner, Microsoft is actually one of the front runners on the DevOps pipeline projects. I haven't been able to get a more current update than April 2017, but that looks, well, I was a bit surprised because I thought on some points they were lacking, but I don't question the Gartner report. So it looks kind of nice from where we see in terms of competition and so on. That's about it for the slides in this session. I'll now switch to Visual Studio Online. And in there, I have already created a new project. I can just briefly take you into how you do that. So Visual Studio, you can sign up for that for free, and you can have up to 5 users working on the same projects for free. And you get a certain amount of build minutes per month and so on, and you can look into the details on pricing there. But actually, out of the box, you get a lot of functionality for no cost at all. But once you signed up for your Visual Studio Online account, you can start creating projects. And when you create a project, you have to give it a name. You can give it a description, and you also have to choose which type of version control you want. So do you want to connect to a Git repository, or do you want to use Team Foundation version control? We currently use Team Foundation version control, and that's more out of historical reasons and not having the time to go into the whole Git learning curve. Besides that, you can actually select which type of process you want to follow in your work. That comes down to how do you treat bugs, how do you treat product backlog items and tasks, and all those agile, scrubby terms that you may or may not have heard about. Actually, Visual Studio Online lets you customize those templates. So Visual Studio Online is born with the Agile, CMMI, and Scrum template. There's a perfect description of what the difference is in this link. So you can actually see the difference between the 3 processes. It might not look as big changes, but when you get down to the nitty-gritty in the daily work, it actually is a a rather substantial change if you choose one over the other. So that's maybe something you should give some thought about before selecting. It is possible to change the process, but there might be some caveats about migrating from one to another. It should all be noted in this guideline in here. So once we created our project, I'll just hop back to the ones that I created today. I've created one called DevOps PaaS Virtual Group. And as you can see, that project consists of a dashboard, some code, some work, build, release, test, and wiki. If I go into the project page, I can get all sorts of, well, information through to whoever is interested in my my project. So that's where you write your well, big brushed descriptions. There's also a dashboard attached to a project, and for those dashboards, let's see, the controls are actually a bit in the way. So let me just see this one. So this would be the starting point of any project dashboard. And you're here able to edit so that you can select certain widgets, as they call it, to have your team progress and so on displayed to the greater public, maybe on a screen in the workplace or something like that. That's not really the focus of this session. I just wanted to show that there is actually a rather substantial number of widgets that you can add to your project in order to help you, pick up pace or see the status of your work. The whole heart of the Visual Studio Online would be the code repository, and obviously I've thought ahead, so I've put in some different folders and different files in my repository. I have a single script. You can have a look at that. That's one for deploying a tabular model, which is some PowerShell. It's directly copied out of a book, which with the reference in the top. So if you want to go look it up, you can see that at the link in the top. So I copied in some worldwide importers, solutions, data warehouse, and obviously AdventureWorks tabular model, and some SSIS packages as well. So this is consisting of what a normal, ordinary BI project would be consisting of. Some relational SQL, some SSIS, and I haven't had the time to actually copy in some reporting services, but that would be something on the side as well. And this not to get too deep into branching strategies and whatnot, because I don't think you would ever see a project structure like this. This is for demonstration purposes only, and I reserve my right to place that warning. So depending on what your project is like, you would have a branching strategy that serves that purpose. So do you do feature releases, or how is your project set up? That actually comes down to how you will put your code into folders in Visual Studio or Team Foundation Code repository. Once changes have been made to the to the code, you can actually look into what changes have been made. I made some changes about an hour ago, maybe some 2 hours ago, and I can sort by author. This is our complete team. I can sort by or filter by created date, and so on. So I can actually track what changes have been made recently within the project. But those are the changes that were actually committed to the main branch, so to speak. So that the code that we are going to release in a few moments. There is another option, and not many use it, but there is a thing called shelf sets, and that's when you have, data that you don't want to check in because it's not done yet, but you want it saved somewhere. If you accidentally drop your laptop or something else, you can put it there, and everyone can actually grab it and work on it from another laptop or somewhere else. So that's a nifty feature of not checking in your code, but still having it somewhere safe. I'll skip the work part. That's all about Agile and Scrum methodologies, backlogs that you work out of, work items. Do you use product backlog items, or do you use user stories, tasks, and so on? But those are richly supported in Visual Studio Online. And there's a whole bunch of practices around going into that topic. But the one thing that I want to say is that once you created the work items and the user stories, you're actually able to track code changes to those work items. So you can actually really easy see what was supposed to be done and actually go in and check in the code, because they are linked together. So you can follow up, or project managers can follow up on what was actually released on a certain date, or even the latest release or so. So that's really a nice way of having a lineage through from your, requirements and then down to the code that was actually implemented. Now I created my project in Visual Studio Online, and in order to connect to that in my Visual Studio, I open up Visual Studio, and in the green connection up here in the Team Explorer, I can actually manage my connections. And if I'm not already connected, I can manage my connections and connect to a project. And now, obviously, you can do that by logging into, I have 2 Microsoft accounts. I have one for work and one for private. And that is actually linked into the visualstudio.com repository, and can actually see all of the repositories that or projects that I am part of or a contributor to. So once that's set up, I can select the project that I'm going to work with in my Team Explorer, and I can see that in my Source Control Explorer in here. I'm just going to open this up. That's actually accessible from in the Team Explorer in this project dashboard, or what you will call it. In here, I'm asked to map that project to a specific location on my laptop. And in my case, I mapped it to my C users, JV, source, workspaces, DevOps, paths, and virtual group in here. So when I click this, I can automatically see that my files are all in place. And I see everything here, and I can start develop locally on my things. So in here, we get a context menu that we can use with the Visual Studio Online, and that's actually a very seamless integration. So once I've changed stuff, I can either roll back or check in, shelve, and so on. But we'll have a look at that in a moment. Let's just say that we just built this project, and now I'm going back into Visual Studio Online to actually create some automatically integration and release processes. So in Visual Studio Online, there's a built-in release tab. In here, I can see that there are several options for me, and I can see in the first tab that I have 2 build definitions. So if we want to go in and edit that, I can create a new one here, or I can just edit the one that I created just about an hour ago. First of all, the main thing to select and to note when working with analysis services is that the agent that is going to build the solution is, there is a requirement later on in the release process that requires it to have certain assemblies installed, and for that reason we have a private hosted agent queue. That on its own is another session. So at the end of my slideshow, there's a link to a blog post describing how to install a privately hosted build agent, and that for the sole purpose of having the tabular analysis services management object model installed. But that's not necessarily so yet, because the first phase of our release is the build phase, and you should always look at these 2 phases differently, because the build phase is actually all about building artifacts. We want something that we can bring to our production environment and deploy. So the first part of this is actually really simple. Now, I have a process that is a build process, and I can, for my phase, I can even add more phases if I want. But I'm stating that I'm selecting a single source of code that I want to build. Now you can see Bitbucket and Subversion is actually supported as well as sources, but I'm using the Team Foundation version control in this case. So I'm stating here that my project is DevOps PaaS VG, and I only want to build the SaaS folder. So when I get my source, I only want to get the source that is relevant to the analysis services tabular model. I can select anything within my subscription, but in this case, I'm only selecting the analysis services folder. And then I'm actually done. I now have told Visual Studio to actually look and get a copy of that code from the repository. Then I can add all sorts of tasks in here. I can do all kinds of stuff with my code, but I'm actually only going to do 2 things. We can, in here, I mean, the list is almost endless. And maybe the one I would like to point out is this one, Chuck Norris quotes. So this one adds a Chuck Norris quote to all of your build outputs. That's kind of nifty. But other than that, we are going to build the solution that we have in our AdventureWorks Internet Sales Tabular model. And that actually only requires us to set one specific path. So I want to actually point to the solution file that I'm going to build, and we're off. We don't need to set anything else. If you want to do configurations and so on, you can do that. But please feel free to read up, and the Visual Studio Online tool is very helpful in guiding you to read about options that you have. Once the code has been built, we want to publish an artifact. So this means that we're gonna get the output of the code that we just built, and we want to stuff it into a contextual artifact. I can give it a display name. That doesn't really mean anything yet. It's just stating publish artifacts as tabular. I apply the path that I want to publish. I give it a name, and then I state where I want the artifact to be published. So I can either use a file share or within Visual Studio Team Services. And if I do the Visual Studio Team Services, this artifact will actually be present for later on when I go to do my releases. So once I've saved my changes to this, now I have options either save as draft, or save in queue. So if I save in queue, I save whatever's in the build declaration, and I also queue a build. That way, I can see that a build is kicked off. And this takes me to a page where I can actually track what's going on with the build. So we notice that for this one, there, I can use the hosted Visual Studio 2017 agent queue, and that comes with some free build minutes every month. So I might just as well use that. So going back to the output of the build, I actually get a very detailed log on what's going on. So we see that the job kicks off phase 1. It initializes an agent. It initializes the job and gets the sources. And if we look closely, we can see that it's only actually getting the analysis services files that we have. We're not getting the full project file tree. So we're only getting the files that are related to the analysis services project, and that's actually what we built just right after. So now we see that it's copied the model database. So this model AS database is something that we can deploy later on, or we can use the BIM file that is present in the project as well. Now, one of the things we also see is that it publishes the artifact. So if we had a private hosted build agent, we would actually be able to see here where the artifact was located. But since this is a hosted agent, we were not able to connect and get that. But no sweat, because when we go to the release phase, now we built our analysis services tabular model. And for each part of the BI solution, we would have a built definition. So we would have a built definition for the tabular model. We would have a built definition for the integration services packages. We would have one for reporting services, and we would also have one for our SQL database or whatever we use as underlying data source. I also have one for scripts, and that is for just my PowerShell script that I use to deploy. That's also in Visual Studio, source safe, so that I can build an artifact from that and get the latest version when I want to release the code. So the release part of the continuous integration and deployment process is a little bit more tricky. One thing is to get our artifacts, but another thing is to actually deploy them to a running server and having it all flow seamlessly with column changes and so on. So this release process is actually where we have to take care of what we release when. Obviously, my definition is only releasing a tabular model, so I'm not having that issue. But it's pretty easy to see how we can actually control the release process. First of all, when I define a new release definition, I should change the name, and because otherwise it's just a generic name, and I don't know one from the other. So that's actually quite important if you have a good number of releases. Next up, I can add artifacts, and those can go from builds that we just did, or Git, or whatever. But in my case, I just made two builds, two build definitions, and those have outputs that I can actually select in here. So I can have my DevOps PaaS virtual group continuous integration build, and I can have the one for the scripts. So I actually added both for this one, but only selected continuous deployment trigger for the DevOps PaaS virtual group CI, which is the tabular model. So that one actually kicks off a release once a build is successfully checked in. This one is not. As we can see, the continuous deployment trigger is disabled, and for the tabular model, it's enabled and will kick off the development environment once the build is done. In here, we have our environments, and this one is a very simple environment. We have one phase, one task. We only need to deploy the tabular model. But that can be a bit tricky as well, because out of the box, Visual Studio does not have the capabilities that we actually are looking for. There are some custom extensions on the marketplace, and we'll have a look at that later. But for now, I'm just going to demonstrate this with a private build agent. So once I created my environment, I can, up here in tasks, I can go to that environment and define multiple phases where they are going to run. So this one, you can see, is actually running on the agent queue that is our private build agent. And that's actually a virtual machine, very small, cost-effective virtual machine somewhere with analysis services installed. So I'm not actually sure the analysis services installation is a requirement for this, but you need to at least have access to the analysis services management objects on that box. But it's still a very cost-effective way of actually doing this. Once we have an agent phase, we add in a PowerShell script, and we can see here that we have the same amount of tasks that we can do during release as we can do during build. Some make sense. We can have some analysis services deployment stuff. These are from the marketplace. I'm not going to demonstrate those today. So we can add all kinds of stuff in here. We even have some for integration services, so you can actually both build integration services projects and deploy those as well. And we have that working on some of our projects, and that works just flawlessly. back to the PowerShell script. We saw that earlier. I can access that PowerShell script through a script path. So when I'm looking in here, excuse me, I can select from the linked artifacts that I was just selecting in the pipeline. And in here, I can see in scripts that I can point to my deployed tabular PowerShell script. That script obviously takes some parameters, and as you can see, there's some semi-cryptic notation going on here. So as we saw in the PowerShell script, it had some parameters: server, database, artifact path, username, and password. Now, this one is actually telling me that password should be a secure string, but in this case, we circumvent that requirement, and you'll see in a minute why. So after these PowerShell parameters, we have some variables stated. Those variables we can declare up here in the variables tab. And I declare 4 of the 5 required parameters. I declare that my database will be called worldwide. I have a password that is secure, so no one can actually see it unless you know it. And then I have a path for the server that I want to deploy to, and then a username to log on to that server. I can set that scope for whatever environment that I like. So if I have multiple environments, I can have the same name for variable, but different values for each environment. So that's pretty nifty as well. So you can have database for development, and if you had a test environment, you could have another name for that variable name. So, seems pretty straightforward. I know that my system default working directory, which is a system or a release variable that I can access, and I know my path to my tabular model in here, which would then be the BIM file, is DevOps-passvg-ci//SAS tabular, which is the artifact name, and then the subfolder AW Internet Sales Tabular Model, which is my artifact path. That could also be a variable that you want to look for different versions in different scripts or so, but in this case, it's just hard-coded in here. So now, did we follow the build to the end? And that actually also is a requirement in order to build the release. Otherwise, you will get a warning up front that there is no artifact for the build that you are selecting. But once you've set up this PowerShell, we can save it and create a release. So one thing we might want to look at is the naming, because, well, all your releases will be named this if you don't change it. So you might want to change something about it, because it's not going to reflect that this is DevOps passvg release. It's going to reflect release and then a revision number. And that can be pretty hard to track once you get going with multiple releases and so on. So let's just, well, before we create a release, I just want to go to the server in question, just so you can see for yourself. There is no, well, there was, I tested it. So now I'm going to delete that database. And now it's gone. And now we can create a release.
Jens, we have a question if you don't mind.
Yes, okay.
Are release notes generated upon completion?
And by release notes, you mean?
That's just what that's the question. Keith asks, are release notes generated upon completion? Keith, if you want to type in a little more specific there, maybe I can help out. Anything that includes what the build contains is what he's asking.
Yes, we'll have a look at that in just a second. Yes, so it will. That's a positive. Okay, so when we create a new release, we can define which environment do we want to trigger it for. And we also get to see which artifact versions we actually deploy in that release. And we can actually type in a release description if you want to. But just for the sake of the demonstration, I'm just going to hit create. And we get this notification that release 7 has been created. When I click that link, I will be guided to a page just like the build log. I can then follow in a, well, more, well, this is not so console like. I get a nice dashboard telling me that the development environment is in progress. It's triggered just now. There are no tests attached and so on. And if this would have been triggered by a continuous integration, I would have had a list of associated work items that were attached to the code. So this actually answers the question from before, because here would be a list of work items, and you could also see that list in here, and you would be able to see commits as well, even though the commit didn't link to a work item. You would actually be able to track what kind of changes were actually included in this particular release. Now, this progress bar is going on, but we have to refresh, and we see now that it succeeded. We can actually go check the logs for what actually happened on the build agent. We see there's a pre-deployment approval if one was defined. We have a initialize the job. We download the artifacts. So the release job actually downloads the artifacts that we defined. We can see that here. It downloads the 2, and then it executes the PowerShell script that we actually had as part of the code release. So we can see here that we get all the parameters that the PowerShell was invoked with. And if we go to the Azure Analysis Services, we'll be able to see the worldwide Analysis Services database go back up. So now I'm just going to delete it once again. And maybe one thing that I missed in my presentation earlier on this is actually some of the options that we have for the environments. Because we can actually define pretty much everything interesting about a deployment. Excuse me. So, will this trigger after a build release? Yes. Do we have any filters on the artifacts? Excuse me. We can set different conditions. We can set it on a schedule. We can even have pre-deployment approvals. So certain or specific persons in the organization need to approve this. They get an email, they click a link, the process goes on, and you can set the timeout. You can set multiple approvers. You can set either one or in this order, or there's a lot of options for approval of deployment. You can have gates, and that's actually a very nifty addition to Visual Studio Online. So you can actually define Azure functions that are required to return a specific, a return code in order for the deployment to move on. You can invoke REST APIs, query, Azure Monitor alerts, and work items, and so on. Is all the bugs fixed? If not, then don't go ahead, and so on. So that's also a way of controlling when to deploy, and maybe more importantly, when not to deploy. So now we've seen that I've manually created and set up a build and release process in Visual Studio Online. And I just want to show you from in here that I'm just actually gonna, see. I have the solution open here. I can just, maybe I can just change it. One thing. So now I made a change. I right click in source control. I can check in. It prompts me to save. Changed model edition. And now check in. So change set 74, sorry, is now successfully checked in. I go back to my build definitions. I already see that this build definition is in process or progress, and I can even tag along to see what's going on with that. I can click the hashtag number, and I'm directed directly into the prompt and see the status of the build process. So we are still looking for the tabular model on the server. This has to run for some time. Usually the first time that you actually deploy a build agent or request a build agent, the first time for the project, it's taking a little bit longer than usually, but usually the build of a tabular project is around 20 seconds or so. Obviously, with business intelligence solutions, we face the issues of huge amounts of data, and that's why you want to keep a fairly small but precise test data set so that you keep your build fast in order to get the feedback from the build and release pipelines that you need in order to fix any issues that might occur later on. Because ideally you would attach tests, automated tests to your release process as well. And for that to actually make sense, you would want it to be fairly quick. So now we see that our build succeeded, which again produced 2 artifacts. No, well, actually in this case, only 1, but we still have the other artifact from the other build, and that's actually the same. So just now, the release 8 was created, and I see that this was triggered by the number 1054 build definition. And if I want to go in and see what release 8 did, I can go in and see the same logs as before. I can see work items attached, none were attached. But more importantly, I can go to my Azure Analysis Services and see that my worldwide Azure Analysis Services database is back on the server. Obviously, Visual Studio does a lot more than what I'm able to demonstrate in a single hour. And I urge you to go in and check out what it does. And well, I haven't dared, depending on the new releases, help for the, well, something always happens. So I didn't want to try it out now. So, but that's just to say that a lot is going on the Visual Studio tool and the online portal in particular. But I might want to show you the marketplace just to give you an idea of what extensions are actually there, because it's quite awesome what people can go and build on to make their lives easier, and then we get the benefit of them sharing it. And a lot of this is actually for free, and you can see, I think actually there's a note, but yeah, okay, so it's actually on the bottom that if it's free or if there's a free trial, but most of them are actually free. So that's a very good starting point to look if you want to extend outside of what Visual Studio Online actually does. So just on a final note, there is a way in with the releases to actually use task groups. So if you do have the same kind of tasks that you want to have applied to either a build or a release, you can group them into a task group, and then you can reference that task group into your build or release definition. That saves some time whenever you have that same process you have to go over again and again, especially in test cases. That's actually quite nifty, because you want to have the same tests run both in production and on test and so on. So that's one way of actually getting the job done easier. Okay, I think I'm back to my presentation. For the rest of the BI stack, SSIS, you're pretty well covered with third-party plugins from the marketplace. Reporting services depends on if you're using SharePoint. It's a little bit more tricky to deploy reports on SharePoint than it is on a report server. Report server, you actually just want to copy the new files up there, but in SharePoint, you have to remap the data sources to the individual files, and that's actually a hefty PowerShelling skill that's required for actually doing that. The relational engine, we have several options. Some ship with Visual Studio data tools, as you saw earlier, but there are other tools available out there, and that's a completely session on its own, whether you want to roll forward or roll back. And there's a lot of decision making to be done when dealing with the relational engine. Last up before the questions, some useful resources. There's the Continuous Delivery book by G.S. Humble and David Fawley. And there's also the DevOps Handbook by Gene Kim and others, which are very good reads. I highly recommend those. And for some leisure reading, the Phoenix Project is actually quite good. you want to, well, if not anything else, then have a look at that, because that's actually quite good. Microsoft has a DevOps assessment tool. You can reach at the devopassessment.net. And as I mentioned earlier, for setting up a privately hosted build agent, you can read up a blog post of mine at the link that is in the presentation. And I think that's it. Yes, so we have some Q&A maybe.
Nope, we only had that one from Keith, so it seems like that's it. Now, I do have a favor I need to ask of you, Jens, and that is we are giving away a $100 gift card, courtesy of Redgate. So I cannot choose the winner for many reasons. So we have 17 attendees. I don't know how you want to choose the winner, but if you could do that, that's up to you. I need you to help me with that.
Okay, so that would be number 12 attendee by arriving time descending.
12 attendee by arriving time descending. Yeah, you didn't make it easy for me, did you? All right, let's see. How the heck do I find that?
But you can order the attendees on the site.
Yeah, I'm working on it.
By arrival time and
By arrival time. There we go. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12. That would be Mr. Kevin Bolin. So Kevin, if you could email me at devops@pass.org, I will get me your information along with your email and all that sort of thing, and I will make sure you get your gift card. All right, so thank you so much, everybody, for attending, and I apologize for the hopefully minor inconvenience in the beginning, and it was great having you, and we'll see you next month. I believe next month we are going to have Robert back again, so Sewell, so we'll have fun there. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jens. It was my honor and privilege to have you, and
likewise.
I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you so much.
Yep.